Welcome to the UKRavens podcast, the only official, unofficial Baltimore Ravens podcast from the United Kingdom.
The picks are in, dust is settling, let's get into it. Oh, and we're in HD. Welcome back to the UKRavens podcast for the first time ever in video. Delighted to confirm this is going to be our first foray into video recordings sent out with your usual addition. So not getting rid of the audio, we're just adding some accompanying video to the UKRavens so you can see what we all look like as we go through our expertise and opinion. My name is Ashley Fallady, joined as always by some friends I met on the internet and indeed in real life, James Ogden, Gordon McGuinness and Ian Domain, here to wrap up everything that's happened over the last 3 days in the NFL draft. We're going to go through all of the picks, thoughts, opinions on all of those players, scheme fits, the whole shebang. But first and foremost, we got together yesterday. You'll have seen, if you're on any of the social medias, Ravens in UK, watch party at the Salmon of Knowledge in Manchester. Really brilliant day. Ian, you were there with us. Thoughts, reflections on a day 3 event in Manchester?
Yeah, it was a great day, wasn't it? We went up to Manchester, all got together. The Ravens put on a really good event. The public, fantastic, all decked out. There was giveaways. There was Madden that you could play. The draft was on. There was cheerleaders. Edgar was there, annoying everyone, leaving Shane hanging for a high five was a particular highlight of everybody's. LaJohntay Wester and Zay Flowers turned up. Couldn't have been nicer. Sort of walked the floor, took pictures with everyone. The Nick Mason had his WWE belt, and they seemed to enjoy that. So yeah, it was a really great day. It was just the sun was shining. Announced a pick. What a fantastic time.
Yeah, it was amazing, wasn't it? Seeing LaJohntay and Zay there was such a wild feeling. And I mentioned to some of you guys, in the process of going up and chatting to him, I really started overthinking what I was going to say to him. I wanted to come across as intellectual and cool, but not too cool, and just being a bit aloof. Ended up saying probably the thing that every UK fan says to him, which was, "Oh, it's great, you scored your first touchdown in London." Just said the thing that you've heard a million times over and over again. So he sort of gave me quite a blasé look and carried on. But Gordon, any reflections? You were there as well. Thoughts, highlights for you?
It was great. It was really nice to see everyone in person. It was really well attended. I thought the atmosphere was really good. And both of the players, like Zay Flowers so Ben Mortimer, our friend, had a T-shirt. It's like the Step Brothers theme, but it's Lamar Jackson and Zay Flowers. Zay's walking past him and points it out, and it's like, that's amazing, that's fire. And like Ben was too busy texting his wife at the time, so he was just kind of like, oh yeah, thanks. And then afterwards he was like, oh no, I should have more engaged with that. But both players were really engaging with the fans. It was a really well put on event.
I think my favourite quote from Zay when I was talking to him, I asked his reflections on Declan Doyle and how that was going and first impressions, and then started to joke and say, well, are we getting any fake fumbles, any of that kind of trickery? He said, we're not faking anything. Touchdown every drive. And I just thought, that's it. That might drop. That is the end of the conversation. I mean, absolutely ideal. So it feels like only yesterday we were together, not physically, talking about all of these picks, talking about predictions, who we thought it might be, who we thought it would ideally be in terms of scheme fit. And now suddenly we're at the back end and we've got a collection of 11 picks now, James, that suddenly turns this roster into a more complete feeling thing, right?
It certainly does. I mean, the first day, right, just addressing the biggest, most glaring hole on the roster, the thing that totally derailed this team last season with the interior offensive line and getting Vega Ioane in was fantastic. But then filling out this roster, the Ravens have the least players under contract next season so far for NFL teams, and so they needed to really hit a lot of these draft picks, and we'll get into the whole class. But I think we have to start with Ioane, right, which is a real tone setter, I think, for the class, but also a real tone setter for what this Ravens team could be moving forward.
And so, Gordon, thinking about Vega Ioane, I think you mentioned in the WhatsApp a little while after that pick came in that actually the run of offensive linemen and things that happened shortly after that probably put us in a position where actually any lingering doubt of whether that was the right pick probably gets removed by that run that came after us.
Yeah, I mean, like in the moment when pick 14 came up and Ruben Bain is still sitting there on the clock, like most Ravens fans, I was like, get us Ruben Bain, get us the game wrecker on defense. pairing with Trey Hendrickson. When you got to the end of the first round, though, including Ioane, 9 offensive linemen were off the board. We saw on day 2 the center started coming off the board early. So I think based on that, Eric DaCosta was vindicated in going with Vega Ioane, because they would not have been able to get an offensive lineman close to that, and they were able to fill out the rest of the draft in the right way. So from like a game theory perspective, I think it worked out.
And so, James, I mean, we talked at reasonable length a couple of weeks ago about what Vega Ioane brings to this team, but now we're talking about it not as a hypothetical, if he joins us, we're now talking about it as he is probably one of our starting interior offensive linemen. So what do we think this means? There's been some discussion around how well he fits the sort of outside zone scheme that maybe we're moving towards. Is that a concern, or do we think actually he's a player that can deliver that?
Yeah, not for me. I think, the first thing that he brings is he's an elite pass protector. I mentioned, I think, on the draft spectacular, you've got to thread a needle to get a pressure against this guy. It just doesn't happen very often, and it's probably going to have to have been set up over the course of a game, and maybe you'll get a brushing hand past the quarterback, and that'll be it. This guy's one of the best pass protecting guards that's come out in years. Arguably better than. I don't think his all-around game is better than Quentin Nelson, but as a pass protector, he's better than Quentin Nelson was at this point in his as a prospect. And so you're putting you're putting a wall in front of Lamar Jackson. And the thing that we've seen from Lamar when he's had those really good offensive lines, he's had Kevin Zeitler to his right hand side, like off to his right hand side, and it enables him to step into throws. And Lamar, one of the most underappreciated things about Lamar, I think, is his ability as a quarterback is his footwork, which at times can look like the textbook football footwork you should expect from a quarterback. That didn't necessarily happen as much last year because he was fearing for his life basically all the time. But to put someone like Ioane in that key spot, and I think he probably will play right guard. He did play a couple of hundred snaps at right guard in his career at Penn State. I think he's going to elevate the passing game, which is what Declan Doyle's looking for. I think from this perspective, from a run game perspective, his fit, it's not perfect. The reach block which is the most important block for an outside zone scheme, is not his strongest suit. It just isn't. But I don't think he's functional in that role. Like he is not someone who is just, like a non-fit at all. Like he does enough to make blocks functional. But I also think there are other elements of his game as a run blocker. When he's in close quarters, when he's doing gap blocking, he is killing people. Like he is destroying people on the line of scrimmage. He is pretty good in space. Like he's a good mover. So it's not like we're getting a guy who's just really cumbersome and just can't move in space. He absolutely can move in space. So once he gets to the second level, he can fit and finish blocks. So for me, it's not really a worry because of how good his overall game is. It's something that I also think there is a real chance that they don't run as much outside zone as it looks as like they might from the outside. Declan Doyle ran a lot of outside zone in Chicago, but it was Ben Johnson's offense, not his. He's going to innovate his own offense. And Dwayne Ledford did run a lot of wide zone in Atlanta, but Dwayne Ledford's just a brilliant offensive line coach, and he can turn his hand to anything. And I suspect from some of the ways in which they've started to build this offense, that they'll run some more inside zone and duo than we thought. And Vega Ioane's fantastic from that perspective. So it's just a very specific, like the reach block is what I would say is probably his weakest block. But I like I said, I think it's nitpicking an outstanding guard prospect who's going to play for 10 years, basically.
That's the key thing for me is, like, you and I talked about this beforehand. So I preferred Spencer Fano because of the athleticism and how the fit is there. But this is not a difference between a good fit athletically and a bad fit athletically. It's a great athlete versus a good one. Ioane's still a good athlete. He's still good enough. And the Ravens have lacked that kind of tone-setting element. And as much as, I didn't love the John Simpson signing for the cost that they've paid for him, Simpson's also a tone-setter. So they now have 2 guys on the inside of that offensive line who are tone-setters and who will go out to look to bully opposing defensive players. So it's really nice to see that offensive line get addressed there.
I know you both had Bain slightly higher on your big boards, and it was close enough that, and then the run on tackles and guards started, so it makes sense. I was obviously the guy that railed against it. You can't take a guard. I'm brought in now. Fine, he's going to be a 4-year player. It's absolutely fine. It'll be great for the Ravens. Will they pay him in the future? Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe they'll let him go. Great pick for next season and beyond. Short term, how close do you think that Ruben Bain decision was? Do you think the Ravens would have had him rated higher on their boards, or was this a draft where DeCosta's really looking at holes on the roster and that's taking his preference?
I think it's rare for them to come out after a draft pick and say that was a hard decision, which is what DeCosta said at the press conference. Normally they will come out and say, this guy was highest rated on our board. There's no discussion of anybody else. But when Bain was brought up, he said that he had to make a decision. That is not something he normally says. So I do think it was a difficult choice. I suspect he probably had it similarly to the way Gordon and I had it. So on my board, I had Bain at 5 and Ioane at 7, and there was a 1 grade difference between the two of them. And so in that perspective, you're saying Bain is the better player from just looking at it from my grading, from my evaluation. But you do have to take into account that the tone setting element of this and the glaring need that they had to really shore up that offensive line. They had already invested the resource in Trey Hendrickson. I think Bain would have been a fabulous complement to Hendrickson, which is the kind of thing that makes you a bit sort of a wish we'd done that. But I think Gordon's point is the one that really stands strongest, which is that when you look at what would have, it would have been the combination which Gordon posted in our group chat, the combination that you'll always be looking at now is Bain and Pregnon versus Ioane and Zion Young, who we'll come on to. And to me, I had Pregnon a little bit lower than a lot of other people. And clearly the NFL did as well, to an extent. And so I think when you're looking at that, to me, I think that the combination they got is probably the better one for what they want. But I have no doubt, I have very little doubt that Bain will be a phenomenal pass rusher, a hell of a run defender, and a guy who's going to play in the league for a long time and be very productive. And the way he snatched the cap on his walkout was just evidence of that. So it will have been really hard for them to pass on Bain. I guess there is an element to which the lack of not addressing the interior offensive line with high picks, high resource, which they've talked about, which they've admitted themselves, backs them into this corner to an extent, where they couldn't necessarily do the purest version of BPA. But it'll be interesting to watch their careers go forward.
On the contract front as well, I would hope that they have learned the lesson from the Linderbaum situation. And if you like Vega Ioane after 3 seasons, that's when you extend. That's when I don't think they regret not paying Tyler Linderbaum what the Las Vegas Raiders paid him, but I do think they probably regret not paying him the year earlier. If they'd been able to get that done, because yes, you pay the higher contract earlier, but you are saving longer term and you get the player locked up.
I think it's a really important point that James makes about looking at it in terms of the totality of what you're able to get. I think we talked about it before. Going interior offensive line in the first round opens up the board to be able to do other things in the second. Had we gone Ruben Bain first round, we're sort of locked into a position where it basically has to be a Pregnon or it has to be somebody like that, because actually suddenly you get to round 3 and you haven't taken a guard. Suddenly you get to round 4 and you haven't taken a guard. And I'm sure over the next few years, we'll see lots of images that show one at pick 14, one at pick 15, and Ruben Bain's got 11 sacks in a year and Ioane's fine as a guard or whatever else. And people will sort of talk hysterically about the difference between those, but actually it is that combination. But for me, I always look for the coach reaction. We've seen the videos. They're on the phone. Ledford's happy. Declan Doyle's happy. Minter's happy. You contrast that with Sean McVay in Los Angeles, and you think, actually, we're happy with the pick. We're solid. So we've touched on him already. Let's jump into round 2 then, because we did flip over to the other side of the ball. We're going trenches. First 2 rounds, which we're delighted about. Zion Young, outside linebacker from Missouri. Gordon, what do we need to know about Zion Young and how good a fit is that in the second round?
It's very, very good fit. It was one of the best fits, and James can probably talk about it a little bit more in a second. One of the best fits for an edge defender for this Ravens defense. it's kind of a throwback to the older style of Ravens edge defenders that they've lacked for a little bit. And I think like in a lot of ways, it's almost like a souped up version of Tavius Robinson, whereby there is a little bit more juice as a pass rusher. I think he does offer a little bit more in the running game, but just someone who can do a lot of the things like set the edge and different things like that. It also was the perfect pick for the fan base. Like ahead of day 2, I tweeted out a thing of this is the board. This could be the board when the Ravens come on the clock at 45. Who are you taking? And I think 80% of the replies were Ravens fans saying Zion Young. When we went live on Ken McCusick's live stream, the pick comes up and there's like 7 of us on the live stream, and it goes around all of us like, who do you want here? Unanimous for Zion Young. Like the board fell perfectly. And I also just think it's now, the Ravens now have a really nicely rounded group of edge defenders. So it was a perfect pick in a lot of ways, I think.
So James, if Gordon's talking about Zion Young as sort of souped up Tavius Robinson, does that suggests that he's there as supporting that run game, helping us on some of those early downs, and then allowing maybe a Mike Green and Trey Hendrickson to come in, maybe with sort of longer down and distance?
I think so. I think he's that to me is probably the blueprint. You're going to have Trey Hendrickson off the field a little more than he was in Cincinnati. They're going to have to start managing his snap count to an extent to get the best out of him, not because he can't. And like, he's fine as a run defender. It's a bit overblown, the run defense stuff. Like, he's not great, but he's fine. So he'd be fine, playing some more neutral downs. But the best version, I think, of what they're going to have is going to be, as you mentioned, Zion Young and Tavius Robinson on early downs. Zion Young is just like, from a run defense perspective, he's a demon edge setter. Like it's the first thing that jumps off the film, and it's what Gordon mentioned, like a bit of a throwback Ravens type pick, because you used to have to look for that all the time. You had to look for guys who were really saying a really hard edge, and that is exactly what he does. And he does it. He's a bigger guy, than the Ravens have drafted in recent years, but he's also doing it with great technique. Like, he has great timing with his hands, great accuracy with his hands. He's always playing with great leverage. If you bring, I think I wrote in my guide, like if you want to get him blocked on the backside, you're gonna have to bring like 3 or 4 guys. Like, he's gonna get through. If you bring a tight end and offensive tackle, he's gonna get through them and make a play on the ball carrier, like from behind. He's a demon backside defender, but from the front side, that edge setting is phenomenal. I think he's a really high processor as well in terms of the way he reads the running game is really good too. So, like, you're getting a really great run defender, and what I think you'll get with Zion Young is some real upside as a pass rusher. Like, I think in the Ravens scheme specifically, because I think what you're getting is, like God said, like an old style throwback type Ravens defender where he's a bit bigger and he knows how he wins. This is the thing. I heard someone, it was either on NFL Network or somewhere else, talk about how he's not got a particularly sophisticated plan. He's not got a sophisticated rush plan. I think he's got the rush plan that works for him. Like, I think he knows how he wins, which is with power. And I think he sets those power moves up really well. So I think there is a bit of a, like, I don't think this is a guy who is going to be, 10 to 15 sacks a year. That's not who this guy is going to be. He's going to be a guy who elevates the run defense, and he's potentially at peak moments in his career going to get to 8 to 10 sacks. And that's going to be plenty. And he's going to have plenty of pressures to go along with that too. So he's the perfect complement. It's a perfect number 2 guy for me, opposite a Trey Hendrickson, like a mashup of Tavius Robinson and Trey Hendrickson on the other side. He's the perfect complement for that, I think, in terms of what he's going to bring. And so the Ravens didn't solve their found a dominant edge rusher with Zion Young. We have to understand that there are limitations in Zion Young's game. He is not explosive. He is not going to win he's not going to win off the snap particularly well. He's not going to win the edge that much. He's not going to get around the edge. But what he is going to do is he's going to keep offensive linemen honest. He's going to go through a number of offensive linemen in the league and get to the quarterback by doing it. And so you're going to have a really good complement on the other side to Hendrickson. And so I think it's just, as Gordon said, when you start to look at the room now, it's really well-rounded. It's exactly what you would want. They almost don't necessarily even need to add a veteran at this point, even if they could, but it would be more of a luxury at this point. So I really like how the room looks. And Zion Young is just at some point, maybe towards the end, we should talk about like what this draft actually means for the Ravens going forward. Because Sarratt, for me, this was another tone-setting pick, but it was also a departure from what they're used to. Even from a measurables perspective, I put out a post on X of like the Ravens normally have looked very much for explosive edge rushers in recent years, and they've taken guys almost exclusively that have an over 10-foot broad jump. They seem to define explosion through the broad jump. And Zion Young didn't have a 10-foot broad jump. He missed the 10-foot mark. He's the biggest one they've drafted since Jalen Ferguson in terms of weight. So this was a different type of edge player that the Ravens have taken recently. And I think that was true at a number of different positions as well. It also feels like he's a grittier player than they've taken at the position in recent years. And that's just an interesting thing for how this might look going forward with a new coaching staff.
I also love the idea of, so like the Max Crosby trade. Crosby trade doesn't happen, and there isn't another edge defender out there who's available that fills everything Max Crosby does. But the Ravens tried to do it, I think, in aggregate, effectively. So you don't get Max Crosby, but you do spend big on Trey Hendrickson in free agency. You then have your first round pick, which you can use on the offensive line, and you then come back in the second round with an edge defender who has a bit more of the power and could do more of the setting the edge and the strength against the run. So it's not, the Ravens, I would imagine that Jesse Minter, all things considered, would probably rather have had Max Crosby. But I think the Ravens did a really good job mitigating the fact that trade didn't go through.
I say this as a compliment, but obviously I'm not watching the tape. I don't know anything about it, but he seems like an angry young man. Like you saw his draft call and he was ready to walk to Baltimore. I don't know about flying. He wasn't much interested in his family. He just wanted to get up there and get going. And I don't know whether that's he maybe felt he should have been a first rounder and he feels a little bit hard done by it, or that is genuinely his sort of demeanor. But in terms of a comp player, would he be sort of a Pernell McPhee role, something like that, or who would we comp him to?
I think that's a decent comp. I think he's a better run defender than Pernell McPhee was, to be honest. Actually, I don't know that the Ravens have drafted a guy like Zion Young before in terms of it's normally he's more of an all-round edge player, and that's the thing that I think that we sort of missed in recent years. He's a tough one to comp. I don't know if you've got anybody going. I can't think of anybody.
No, it is difficult, and I think you're right. Like what we've seen the Ravens do when they've attacked this style of player is going for effectively pure run stuffers in Tavius Robinson. This time the difference is getting someone who does have a little bit of pass rush juice as well.
And it does, there's a sort of constant platitudes from coaches around physicality and getting back to what we want to be and getting back to what it means to be a Raven. But actually, like you say, James, these first two picks feel like they've really leaned into that ethos of actually, we need bullies. We need people on the field who will be bullies. One of the questions I had, and potentially a slightly ignorant one, is you mentioned the sort of prospect of him opposite Hendrickson or something like that. To what extent is there limitations on which side they rush from? So we talk about left tackles and right tackles and the difficulty sometimes of switching. Is that the same in terms of rushing from the other side? Could we see infinite combinations of Robinson and Zion Young and Hendrickson and Green and sort of all myriad by just switching them over? Or are they slightly more limited in terms of, I prefer rushing from the right side?
It depends how they're going to set the front, to be honest. Like there's an issue that if you're going to have, so if you're going to have, it depends what personnel they're facing, and it depends how they're going to set up on different downs. If you're getting in a situation, so if you're facing 12 personnel, what I think is going to happen is Minter's going to go with 3 down linemen, which means he's going to have Madubuike and Travis Jones, plus maybe, if it's an early down, maybe Hendrickson won't be on the field. So then you're looking at, do they have another big defensive lineman like Broderick Washington? In that scenario, you're going to want some more flexible type players on the edge. You're going to have one rush, so you're probably going to have one rush. So you're going to have someone rush probably from the right side in that situation, or you might set it up differently. So generally, what you want is horses for courses. You want different styles. The thing with Zion Young, I would say that precludes him the bit where he won't get on the field is if they are going to go with 3 down linemen, a rush linebacker who is maybe Tavius Robinson. I don't know that Zion Young gets on the field opposite Tavius Robinson as the fifth kind of guy on the front, because if Tavius Robinson is coming and he's one of the four that is kind of is going to be coming at the either at the run or at the quarterback, you may want the guy on the other side to be a genuine Sam linebacker and drop into coverage. And Zion Young isn't going to do that particularly often, particularly frequently. And so it depends how, like I said, it depends how they're going to set it up. I think there is definitely a world where Zion Young plays on a lot of neutral early downs. I think there is a world where he also potentially rushes inside on passing downs. There'll be times when he rushes outside on passing downs too. I think the thing they have is just a well-rounded room, like we've talked about. You've got a guy now who, isn't going to be a guy who's going to drop in coverage particularly much. He's not a traditional, he's not Tyus Bowser, for instance. Like, that is not who he is. But he is going to play an awful lot of that at the outside linebacker position. I think the thing Ravens fans are going to have to get used to is this isn't the kind of 3-4 of old that you're used to seeing. Like, it's not, they're not going to plug in a rush linebacker like Suggs and a Sam linebacker like Bowser and just play with 3 down linemen all the time. That's not what's going to happen. They're going to get quite creative. If you look at the way Minter ran the Chargers defense and how McDonald ran this Ravens defense and how Anthony Weaver used to set our defensive front, he's very creative, and they're going to use the bodies they have in different ways. And Zion Young, I think, adds really nicely to that group as a different guy, basically.
Awesome. So I'm suitably sold on rounds 1 and 2 as tone-setting picks. Anything else on either Ioane or Zion Young before we skip ahead into some of these later rounds? So we all have our different points at which we start to not recognize the names of people that we're drafting. For me, round 3 is clearly that time because Jacobe Lane, wide receiver from USC, Gordon, is a name that I am in no way familiar with. I don't think his name came up in the pre-draft spectacular or anything like that. So in the light of day, what do we know about Jacobe Lane at pick 80?
Yeah, so this is something, in the lead up to the draft, Eric DaCosta talked about the need to add an X receiver. When he talked about what they had on offense, they didn't have a traditional X receiver. So that's the guy who is you're looking for to be able to make contested catches, the guy who quite often is going to have coverage rotate towards him, all those different things. The Ravens have Zay Flowers, who is a tremendous wide receiver and can do a lot, but he's just not, with his size, that same type of receiver. And the Ravens traditionally have really struggled to find that guy. I think there's like a genuine debate on whether or not Lamar Jackson needs and wants an X receiver. And I think that potentially leads into like DeAndre Hopkins' usage last year. But I think DeAndre Hopkins' usage last year showed that the offense benefits from that. So trying to find players who can do that side of things. And Jacobe Lane is a tremendous athlete. Was a little bit early for me. I would have, if you swap the 2 wide receivers that they drafted in the next 2 picks round, it would have made much more sense to me. But that's sometimes just how the boards are for NFL teams. Lane's a great athlete, makes highlight reel catches, makes tough catches in the red zone, in the end zone, all those different things. Explosive athlete on his relative athletic score test, and it was the explosives that really stood out on it. He's not a great separator. Matt Harmon's reception perception charting on him wasn't particularly flattering. But that's just not the type of receiver he is. And I think that's fine in the 3rd round. Over the years, I used to spend quite a bit of time scouting wide receivers. And the big mistake I made early on was I loved contested catch guys. I loved Jalen Strong, who was a receiver out of Arizona State. And one of the things I've learned over the years is separation matters. It really matters in the 1st round. You couldn't take a guy with Jacobe Lane's separation profile in the 1st round, but you can take him in the 3rd and the 4th round, I think. I think at that point you're looking for different skill sets and going and getting a guy who can make some of the tough catches. One of the things that I heard people over the weekend, I think at the draft event and also on Ken McCusick's stream, talking about with Lane, was that the underrated part of what they might be trying to replace with him is a little bit of what Isaiah Likely does. Isaiah Likely was very good at those contested catches. So I think it's a really interesting fit. As I said, a little bit early for me, but ultimately they were looking for that skill set in this draft, I think.
And James, how do you see Jacobe Lane fitting in with the likes of Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, LaJohntay Wester, Tez Walker.
I guess the thing for me with Lane was that they left other guys on the board that I probably would have preferred, and that's the sort of, I've been in that situation a few times with the Ravens, I think, over the years, and he got the difficulty with Lane when you watch the film, and I did him, but I didn't include him in the guide because I thought it would be much later on day 3 that he ended up in getting drafted. And I think with Lane, the challenge is it's inconsistency. And the inconsistency shows up in a number of different areas of his game. It shows up when he's releasing from the line of scrimmage. It shows up in the way he separates, in the technique he has on different routes, different breaks. And it shows up in his blocking as well, actually. And for me, there's a challenge there. And it's a similar challenge that I had with Tez Walker. And obviously, I've railed against Tez on the podcast quite a lot. Tez has a ridiculously high ceiling as a player. It's just hard to bet on. I've done this for long enough now that I feel like it's hard to bet on the trait, him ironing out the inconsistencies in his game. And it's a similar story with Lane. I think it's not that I think he's that there isn't a really high ceiling there for him. There absolutely is, because you can see it. You can see when it's right, when he does have that attention to detail in the release, when he does have the attention to detail in the route, he is then getting separation. And when he gains that separation, you put the ball within 12 yards of him, he's gonna come down with the catch, because the catch point skills are insane. So I can understand why they make the pick. It's a swing for the fences type pick, but it's a pick that I'm not sure. I think I put a post out saying I'm going to need to ban them from making 3rd and 4th round picks at receiver. But then we'll talk about Sarratt, who I actually really like. So maybe they've redeemed themselves a bit. But yeah, Lane for me was just it was an odd one with the players they left on the board. I would have preferred, like, there were a few guys that went later on. After that pick, Ted Hurst was one. I thought they would really like Chris Brazzell, and I could get on board with Brazzell. Actually, they had quite a presence at his pro day. Speed guy, like, which they also normally like on Lane. Lane's got plenty of speed, but Brazzell is blazing speed. And actually, for the types that they normally like, Brazzell was quite different in the sense that they were looking. You're not looking at a guy that's just blazing speed. Like, he's got. Yeah, he didn't run a full route tree at Tennessee and didn't do it very much, but there was plenty to see there from his movement skills, the way he sinks his hips. Like, there was a lot, I think, from Brazzell that made me think there's some potential here beyond just the speed. And I thought they would like him. And he went after. Ted Hurst went after. Pregnon went just after this pick as well. So did Trey Zoon, who I quite liked as a center prospect, although the Ravens clearly didn't. Jayshawn Barham went just after as well, who is I'm not sure about going back to back on the edge room, but they've done it before, and so that's an interesting one. So to me, there were a number of other guys that went just after this pick that made me think I was not sold on Lane, I don't think.
You talked about EDC and coming out and saying he's looking for that X receiver. How much of this pick and some of the others that we're going to get onto, the pass catchers, do you think was DeCosta, and how much is the new coaching staff coming in? We've watched Lamar, we all love Lamar, but he does like to throw up to an open receiver. He had D-Hop, as you've mentioned, and a few others that he doesn't really seem to trust too much. I'm just going to throw the ball up and let you go and get it. Do you think maybe a Declan Doyle's come in and sort of said, look, we're going to be doing this now. You've got to get on board, and we need some guys who can do it?
I think so, yeah. Like, Eric DeCosta is not going to go out and just add an X receiver just because he feels the Ravens need it. Like, he's not going to do that unless he knows that it's part of what Declan Doyle is going to be looking for. So as they've built this, there will very likely have been huge input from the coaches on what it is they're needing, the style of player, and all those different things. Going back to part of what James was saying as well, the most interesting thing for me about this pick is what it tells you about what they thought about the centers in this draft class. And one of the things we heard was that they did like Jake Slaughter, they did like the guy from Iowa, Logan Jones, who both went in the second round. They both went a little bit earlier. And I did think going into the draft, there was a real chance that there was a little bit of an earlier center run, just because there were some center needy teams in the NFL. It's fascinating to me that they didn't seem to like the other centers in this class, because if I would probably have given the Ravens an A+ for days 1 and 2 if you just swapped this pick with a guy like Sam Hecht from Kansas State. But presumably they just didn't like Hecht that much.
And it did feel like wide receiver as an example, but a few positions across the board were sort of indicative of a real deviation from the wisdom of the crowd, the consensus boards. There were quite a few picks where the sort of overwhelming reaction from a lot of people was, that's a lot earlier than we thought that guy was going. Do we think that there's something in teams trying to really lean into this zig when everyone else is zagging type mentality of, I just want to get ahead and we're just going to do it? Or do we think actually it's just indicative of some bad process?
I think this was an interesting draft class for that. And one of the things that we saw on day 2 in particular was the teams trading down took less value on like the traditional. So on day 1, what's called the JJ draft value board. And as much as there are other boards and different things have been used, everything generally does still go back to that and still leans closer towards that. On day 1, you are teams moving up, we're giving up value to move up almost exclusively across the board. On day 2, though, especially once you got into the second half of the first round, the teams coming up weren't having to give up negative value. It was the teams moving back that were content to lose a little bit of value to add an extra pick and move a little bit further down in the draft. And I think that probably just tells us that in this draft class, that 50 to 130, 140 range, the NFL teams weren't really like sticking to the consensus. They all had kind of guys they wanted to target, but also they probably didn't see a huge drop-off in talent. And it was probably more based on positional runs and thinking, right, we have to go up and get this guy now because the way this position runs go, and we think there's a reasonable chance they're not there when we pick next.
Yeah, it's always interesting. I mean, we sort of think about the player we'll come on to next, Elijah Sarratt, another wide receiver from Indiana. There was sort of a feeling that they really weren't expecting him still to be there at 115, but actually to then not just have taken him at 80 if you don't think he's going to be there at 115. It's such a weird prospect in terms of the draft strategy. I mean, this is that whole gamesmanship and game theory of, well, we love this guy, but do we love him enough to take him at 80? Or do we roll the dice on 115? And if that ends up with us double dipping at wide receiver, we're still happy enough with that. It's such an interesting dynamic, isn't it, as it goes through?
Yeah, and it's about looking at what are you what is the NFL going to value, but also what are you interested in as a team. I think from this sort of run on receivers is a really interesting cross section of it, right? Which is that there is a chance that the Ravens had Malachi Fields as part of this group of players as the top like potential ball winner in contested catch situations. Who I think he should be if he was the number one. He went before they picked. Then you've got Jacobe Lane and you've got Serat as well. And I wonder if this was the cluster of players that they had, and they looked at it and said, Lane, like you're sort of. I saw the Athletic Football Show talks about Miami basically veering wildly between like solid get it on the fairway type pick, and then really going for the flag picks where they were really gambling. And I think this was a good example of that, right? Which is that if they'd have gone with Sarratt in the third, it would have said more that they wanted a kind of, get out on the fairway type pick. This guy can be a solid, like has a higher floor. Whereas Lane was her swing for the fences. Let's get him in it. And I feel like they probably went with him because the traits are better in that from that perspective. And it was a similar dilemma, I think, probably at defensive line, but they never got to make that decision about guys like Chris McClellan, who has all of the traits in the world. There's the length and the power and the athleticism, but isn't as polished versus some of the other guys that would have been there for them at defensive line. So I think that's probably the trade-off they had to make in this draft. And I think they got there down into the fourth round and thought, well, let's just double dip. Let's go again. Like, it was a weird one to double dip like that. And again, there were other guys that left on the board. But yeah, I'm with Gordon as well on the point about, like, I think this was just a get your guy type class. It was just get the guy you like and don't worry about any sort of from a value perspective. I think the Ravens still tried to play their game where they still played, here's our board, let's get best player available and make it work. But to an extent, the Ravens also sort of eschewed that a little bit because of the way that they attacked the first round. And we talked about it. They went with Ioane when it seems like Bain was at least equal on their board, or maybe slightly less. So I think they probably played the game a little bit themselves in this draft class too.
And there's another interesting dynamic of the fact, obviously, Elijah Sarratt was the first pick that we saw in Manchester. It came up on the screens when we were watching. And then shortly after that, LaJohntay Wester and Zay Flowers arrive in the building. And there's always sort of a wonder of, well, we've just double dipped at the position you guys play at. So how do you feel about that? Actually, it turns out I asked Zay about it. He said he's familiar with both of their games. He's really excited about it. He's keen to see what they bring, and actually thinks it rounds it out really well. So Gordon, you said you were quite high on Elijah Sarratt. It is a guy that you mentioned in the pre-draft show. So what do you like about him, and what's he bringing to that room?
I like to use what James talked about. He is very much a get it on the fairway type of player. He is good and solid at a lot of different things. He's not an amazing athlete. So if you look at the relative athletic score, Jacobe Lane was in the 20s, I think, across the last 20 draft classes at wide receiver. Elijah Sarratt's nowhere close to that. He's a very average athlete in NFL terms, not in us sitting here terms. But just does a lot of stuff really well. And again, is that kind of ex-receiver that you want to win on the outside. The other note I will add to hopefully get people excited about the pick, this is not something that I personally agree with, but my old colleague Trevor Sycamore, who was at PFF as our lead draft analyst, he spent the weekend as Bleacher Report's draft analyst and has the NFL Stock Exchange podcast with Connor Rogers, spends a lot of his time studying college football players and projecting them to the NFL. He preferred Serat as a prospect to his teammate Omar Cooper Jr., who went in the first round. So I personally don't agree with that, but Trevor's someone's opinion that I value a lot. So the fact that he thinks that, the fact that he thinks the Ravens got a player in the fourth round who's better than a guy that went, I think, 30th overall, shows that there was real value in that pick.
And James, so what do you think the Sarratt pick means in terms of scheming, usage? What do we see him bringing to a Declan Doyle offense? As much as we know nothing about what that looks like, how do we see it rounding out?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting because I think he'll directly challenge Bateman for that role. The thing with Sarratt, I like Sarratt a good deal too. And I think the thing with Sarratt is his technique. We talked before about Lane, right? About his technique. I feel like Sarratt's technique is far superior to Lane and is far more consistent. Particularly, he's good releasing from press, but it's not the best part of his game. I think the technique that he shows in terms of his separation on different types of breaks is very good. I think he is an expert in terms of zone coverage as well, in terms of gaining targets against zone coverage, which is really important if you're going to be a Ravens receiver because of the amount that they face zone coverage because of the threat of Lamar's legs. So he's a really nice pickup for me, I think, in the fourth. And to me, I think there is a chance that I think there is a chance that he competes with Bateman pretty hard. He doesn't have the athleticism that Bateman has, but he's not that far off. He's got the base athleticism to play for a long time in the NFL, and I think there's a really good chance that he could unseat Bateman as the season goes on. I think he is that good. So it's a really interesting pickup. It's a real departure from what the Ravens would normally prioritize at the position. He's not, at least Lane had the athletic profile that they normally look for at the position. Sarratt doesn't have that, but he's a good ball winner, a good consistent catch guy. So really got on back shoulders as well. So there's a real departure there in terms of what they're looking for. And so there is definitely something that Doyle has injected into this Ravens evaluation process where he's sort of, they have actively gone out and looked for this type of receiver and not like a ball-winning catch point receiver and not really worried too much about anything else because Lane and Serat are complete polar opposite. Apart from being great at the catch point, everything else is sort of polar opposite in terms of what they do. So interesting pick.
So Ian, thinking about that as a competitor to Rashad Bateman, then do we see that as something that actually could unlock the best of Rashad Bateman, and that's something we're hoping for, or do we think actually we've seen bits of it, we haven't seen enough of it? If we bring in a guy that is doing that role, maybe we move on.
Yeah, I think we're all still fairly on the Bateman train, aren't we? I think we've always been fans of him, and we're still waiting for that breakout. He had that 1 year and then seemed to regress. I can't hurt at all to have some competition behind him. I was going to jump in there and ask sort of what is the pecking order now, because Zay's obviously on his own. He's fine. And then I imagine Bateman's 2 at the minute with Tez Walker behind him. And if I'm Rashad Bateman, I know James's thoughts on Tez. Twitter loves him. He's the second coming, but Bateman's probably quite comfortable in that role, knowing hasn't been a huge ton of depth behind him. So maybe bringing in a couple of guys that will push him will get the best out of a Rashad Bateman, who was a first round talent. Like we've seen it. He can play, and if he gets back to anywhere near his best, it can only be good for the Ravens. So the more competition they bring in, the better. I'm still a Bateman fan. I'd really love him to have a huge season, not just because Eric DaCosta came on our podcast and said he was going to do it, and then he did. But we've always been Bateman fans on this podcast, and I don't see any reason yet to jump off.
I also like the fact that Sarratt's just ridiculously productive. When James was talking there, I was just looking up his college stats, and he averaged over 2 yards per route run every season he was in college. And like, we see receivers that come into the NFL not be that productive on a down by down basis. So it's really nice to see them in the 4th round get a guy who they don't need him to, they're not just looking for a swing for the fences type thing. They want someone who's shown they can be productive in college and has proved it on the field.
Awesome. It's remiss of me, I should have mentioned at the start, as I peek behind the curtain, you'll see phones, you'll see things shifting around. That's our little behind the scenes show script, keeping us on track, especially now that we're all together and we're live and we're doing this, and we need to make sure we're keeping it tight because everyone's got somewhere to be. We're not just sat in our living rooms downstairs ready to pop off to bed whenever. So that's what we're doing. We're not checking football scores, as interested as we are. We're just making sure we're keeping ourselves broadly on track. So after the Elijah Sarratt pick, obviously we're in Manchester, the beers are flowing, we'll start chatting. Everyone breathes a bit of a sigh of relief in terms of, we've actually got a fair amount of time until we pick again, so we can get another round in, we can start doing this. Suddenly, great excitement in the building when we realise we've traded up from 154 to 133, obviously giving away that 154 and a 6th round pick next year, which I think speaks to your point, Gordon, about this element of actually you can get it reasonably cheap this year. It feels like it wasn't so much to give up. I don't know anything about Matthew Hibner. I think to a certain extent that's probably consensus in some way, not to be disparaging, but I think obviously in that room we've got the cheerleaders there, we've got Edgar there, we've got all these kind of things, and we gave it real gusto for the pick. My immediate reaction was, I don't know who this guy is and how excited I should be. So I suppose really, James, that is the question. Who is this guy and how excited should I be?
I think Hibner's it was an interesting pick. I think both the tight end picks suggest what the Ravens are looking for from a tight end position, which is an all-around tight end. Early in the draft, you saw the Bears take Sam Roush, who's the best blocking tight end in this draft, to add to their tight end room, which now includes Colston Loveland, who was the best blocking tight end in last year's draft, and Cole Kmet, who's one of the best blocking tight ends in the league. All 3 of them are effective receiving threats as well. Roush with a bit more work to do, obviously, but a really interesting pickup there to add to that room. And that's where Declan Doyle has come from, which is why I'm mentioning it. I think they do want to look for so the NFL is moving more towards 12, 13 personnel. They're starting to see tight ends on the field more often. That trend doesn't work when your 2 tight ends are Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, who don't necessarily aren't necessarily a massive blocking threat. Like, the reason you run 12 and 13 personnel a bit more, or some of those offenses that are doing that run that more, is because you want an equal threat of run and pass. And so you can establish the run out of 12 personnel and then start play action off the back of that. You don't have to have, it's been well documented, play action will be successful whether you're a good running team or not. But one of the things that helps is having a tight end on the field where you're worried about him blocking your defensive end as much as you're worried about him going out into the flat. So I think both tight end prospects, and Hibner was an interesting example of this, are all-around type prospects. They're guys who, less so Quamas, but more Hibner, is a guy who could be an all-around tight end, My issue with Hibner is he's a bit far away from both sides of that equation. So I think there is a flaw with Hibner where it's like he doesn't quite really contribute very much because he can't get on the field as a receiving threat. He can't do what he needs to do as a blocker. What I saw in his film, which I watched a minimal amount of film before the draft, I watched a little bit after he was picked. I think what you see is a guy who can make blocks functional in the box against bigger defenders. Like I've seen him do it. The problem is at the moment, there isn't much sustain on those blocks. So he makes them functional for a split second and then they're not functional anymore. So what you want to see is him be able to handle those bigger defenders on a more consistent basis, which is going to take some time. He's going to have to develop that. As a receiving threat, there's some intrigue there. There's some interest with his skills and the way he runs routes. But again, he's a little bit further away in terms of actually potentially being a productive NFL receiver. So I think with Hibner, it's a case of what is his development path? Can they develop him to an all-around tight end and they develop both sides of it? Or is he the guy where they're saying, okay, he looks like he could be Charlie Kolar in 3 years' time? Kolar was on quite a curve, like he didn't see the field very much early on in his career. And so maybe that's what they were hoping with him, that he'll be the blocking tight end in the future. But it'll be interesting to see. I just felt like he was a little bit far away on both fronts there.
But Gordon, anytime you trade up for a pick, I kind of get inordinately excited about, well, we must have a plan. We must love this guy. We must have something about him that we think is the right pick. So what do you think that is for Hibner?
Yeah, I mean, all of us sitting around watching the draft and the Summer of Knowledge, I think we all assumed this was Sam Hitt, the center from Kansas State. And when Hibner's name is called, everyone, I think, was relatively surprised. The big thing was actually Jamie doing the pick, which we can talk about in a little minute. I think with Hibner, what the Ravens see is the athletic profile. It is, to what James was saying earlier, the Ravens did appear to go back and forth between gambles on athletic profiles and then coming back to players who are just a bit more solid production. Hibner's very much a guy who, if it works, could be a real impact player in the NFL because of his athletic profile. He's just not refined and isn't there yet. So it's very low floor, very high ceiling. There must have been something about this guy for the Ravens that the run on tight ends at that point, they felt like there was a chance they were not going to get a tight end with that athletic profile if they didn't move up in the draft.
And Ian, Gordon's mentioned the bit that we have to touch on here. So this was Jamie's pick, our International Fan of the Year. Obviously, you guys spoke to her a few weeks ago to get a sense of how she was feeling. She mentioned at that point that she was still figuring out what I'm going to say. Should I try and throw some shade? She certainly did, and she's quite deservedly gone pretty viral, hasn't she?
Yeah, she said she was going to do it, and she stuck to her guns. Good on her. And as you say, it's just blown up, hasn't it? It's gone everywhere. It's great. I saw the actual NFL sort of full account retweeted it. Mark Ingram seemed to enjoy it. Jameson Hensley's been on it. It's been on plenty of other places. I always say go and see it, but I'm sure everyone has already. Yeah, she did fantastic and did us proud. And I think we're going to get her back on in a couple of weeks. She's back from her trip, and we'll talk all about it. She went to Baltimore as well before she went to the draft, so plenty to come back on and tell us.
Yeah, it looked amazing. And I mean, Mark Ingram set the tone the day before, didn't he? I mean, he came in full force, and so she just carried that energy all the way through. So let's jump to a next live announced pick. So pick number 162 was the Salmon of Knowledge live in Manchester. We were all gathered outside. Ian, you were getting content rather than being in the melee for this one. Was that a sort of some trauma from last year in London that you just thought, I want to avoid it?
Yeah, this is old hat to me and James now. We've done this before, so I was stood behind James last year. Actually, I don't think you can see me on the TV. And this year I decided no, I was going to be the content guy. So I was stood on a bench, sort of behind the camera, watching it all go down. And it was just fun to watch again, just to see the excitement, to see it all, how it all went down. Obviously, FG was there. I'm sure everyone is aware of FG, and his goings on and what he does. Zay Flowers is his best mate now. It challenged him to get to Pittsburgh for the draft and back in time. Luckily, he made it. I was touch and go there for a while. I think sort of planes, trains, and automobiles. It was a real rush job, but he was there. He made the pick. Spoiler alert, I said this to you guys. So when James made the pick last year, he knew who the Ravens were taking. He knew it was Teddy Buchanan because he had it on his little card sort of 5 minutes before. I'd seen Kim write down the name on the card because obviously I was behind the scenes. Maybe 10 minutes before we announced the pick, and I was trying to find Gordon in the melee, and I was trying to mouth to him who the pick was to sort of get a thumbs up or thumbs down. And I think I just looked pretty stupid in the end doing it because I had people waving arms at me and all sorts, and no one really knew what was going on.
What a missed opportunity for me as well. Like you saw the thing on night one of the NFL draft where before the Rams picked Ty Simpson, Ian Rappaport just out of nowhere goes, and maybe this is a spot where Ty Simpson might be. Like, Ian, you've been told that. Right at that moment. That's why you're doing it. Mike Mayock used to be really bad for doing it back in the day. I could have had 10 minutes before a tweet that went out that was, I wonder if the Ravens would think about a guy like Chandler Rivers here, and I could have looked really smart doing it. The pick itself though, like I like Chandler Rivers. I like the fit. He was better in 2024 than he was this past season. I think his strength is zone coverage, which we're going to see on the back end of this defense quite a lot. He is on the smaller side, a little bit on the lighter side, but I like the fit and I like the value of getting him at this point in the 5th round.
I was slightly gutted not to have been called in at the last second to have made that pick, because looking at FG, obviously the thing we haven't mentioned is this was on at the same time as the Man City Southampton FA Cup semi-final, and as a big Man City fan, FG was absolutely going through the ringer as a sort of tight game comes to its conclusion. And I thought, if this goes the wrong way, this might be a guy who's got no interest in being on international television announcing a pick. I was getting my vocal warm-ups. I stopped having the beers just for a minute, but instead just sort of had my daft face looking behind him for 2 minutes. But it was an odd experience in terms of I didn't hear what he'd said at all. So I'm cheering for a guy. I've got no concept of who we've just taken. I don't know who we've got. I suppose, actually, once I learned the name, I still didn't know who we'd taken. So it is what it is. James, Chandler Rivers, how do we see him slotting in? I suppose the other question as well is, we've kind of got the addition this year of 2 of our later round cornerbacks from last year that we didn't see, in Bilal Cohen and Robert Longerbeam. So how is that room coming together with the addition of someone like Chandler Rivers?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think Rivers goes into the battle to be the Ravens' sort of primary slot quarterback, which for the Ravens is a role that is not on the field that often, because often when they get into nickel situations, Cal Hamilton's the nickel defender. So it's more of a dime package type defender. Also, the Ravens have some versatile outside corners that play into that scenario. At the moment, the leader of the clubhouse will be, I'm going for metaphor out today, leader of the clubhouse will be Keon Martin, because he's the guy who was the incumbent, basically coming into the battle. Robert Longerbeam from last year will be one of the guys that is in the mix for that type of role. I really like Kone, but Kone will be more of an outside guy. Rivers goes straight into that battle, and he will have a chance of winning that battle with the type of player he is. He's sort of the corner from Indiana, Pons. Pons. Yeah, right.
Yeah, Pons.
Yeah. Just a really is a really great player who's a guy who will probably play in the slot in the NFL. Will probably have to cover slot receivers in the NFL, but was a guy who looked like, for all the world, he could play outside if he wasn't the size he was. And I think Rivers is sort of a poor man's version of Pons in this draft class. Really love his competitiveness, the way he defends the run. Like, this is a smaller guy. I think Minter mentioned it in the press conference, smaller guy, but still still sticking to that kind of tone setting type picks where, he really defends the run hard, sometimes to a point where he's overly aggressive and people can use that against him. But I really like Rivers. I think he's a difficult guy to shake as a receiver. Whether you're a big guy or a small guy or an explosive guy, he's just really a really solid cover corner. And so there's a real chance that he does, I think, rise up the Ravens' sort of depth chart corner. But there is a bit of a logjam now that they're going to have to work out. Like I said, I think you're going to have the starting corners from last year. I'm not going to go through the depth chart; it'll take forever. But there's a lot of corners, right, on this roster right now, and so working out how they're going to make that smaller corner that's going to cover the slot in certain situations, working out how they're going to make that work. I don't know that they're going to be able to carry a bunch of those guys. So it does feel like Martin, Rivers, Longerbeam are really battling for that spot on the roster, I think.
Cool. So that took us to the end of the fifth round. A couple of compensatory picks rattled back to back. We've mentioned Josh Quabash a little bit, Gordon. So is there something different or specific that we think he's bringing that we're not seeing from Hibner? How close are we getting back to that kind of Kohler likely combination, or is it actually just a coincidence because we've double dipped at tight end again?
It's really interesting, and there's always going to be those comparisons. The difficult thing is the draft where the Ravens landed Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kohler. I remember thinking, man, they've landed two tight ends I really like. In this draft class, they haven't landed two tight ends that I really like. And to be very clear, I am not Eric DeCosta. I am not a fully paid football scout. So there's a reason why those guys get paid. I personally would have liked to have seen a better blocker coming in. And there's a guy that James liked that he put me on to that went to the Browns in the 7th round. I was devastated about. Guy Carson Ryan from BYU, who's really strong as an inline blocker. Cuevas is okay as a blocker. He's a little bit on the shorter side. But the Ravens must think there is something there in terms of what he's going to be able to do.
And then that next pick, Ian, 174, Adam Randall, running back from Clemson. Sort of notable point here is the source of the pick more than the player. So what happened here?
Yeah, so this one seems to have come out that it was made by the owner, and that was a sort of predetermined thing that Mr. Bissotti was gonna make a pick, and this was his guy. Don't know how he landed on him and where he's come from. But as you said, we're into the weeds now. When these picks were getting announced, my immediate thing was to turn around to Gordon and just thumbs up or thumbs down. Gordon gave me this, like, no idea. That's the reaction I got from him.
And so, James, we're talking about a converted receiver to running back. And so the natural inclination would be, this is a guy with some hands, okay? This is a guy with some hands. So we're talking about potential Justice Hill replacement involvement here, or perhaps not?
No, the ironic thing is he was a really highly recruited guy at receiver. But the ironic thing with Randall is that it's the receiving is probably the worst part of his game as a running back, and is the reason why he converted to a running back rather than continue to be a receiver. He actually started to pick up the nuances of the game, nuances of the position reasonably well. So there is some potential, I think, with Randall, especially with his athletic profile too. Like there's and the fact that he has so recently moved to the position tends to suggest there's a bit more of a ceiling there to access. So I think it's an interesting pick. It's not one that I would have prioritized. It wasn't a great running back class, so you're picking out of a tough crop, really. So to pick Randall out, I think is one where it's sort of saying this could be, down the line, I think he could be a nice number 2 back for a team if he develops in the way he needs to develop. But again, I think, this is what we talked about back and forth, right? The swing for the fences versus hit the fairway. Mixing metaphors there a bit. This is more of a swing for the fences type one, just because of who he is, his profile, how long he's played the position. But an interesting one, and not one that I'm going to thumb my nose at too much in where they're taking him.
He's very much got a thanks very much, Steve, but you're going to bump your toe on something and sit out the year written all over you, isn't it?
So round 6, we're going to have to come to Gordon on this pick, because you got very excited at the fact that we took a punter. It wasn't the guy that you've been advocating for. It wasn't Brett Thorson. It wasn't the guy that you put in every Ravens in 5 mock draft for the last 6 weeks. It wasn't that guy. It was Ryan Eckley, punter from Michigan State. I've seen a lot of stats about hang time and inside the 20, and none of it means anything to me. Is he a good punter?
He was good in college. Hang time wasn't his strong suit in college. So that's one of the things I think I worry about as he converts into being a pro player instead of a college player. I think it is really important to note, though, that the college to pro transition in terms of like coaching quality for kickers and punters is probably bigger than any other position, just in terms of like there are good quarterbacks coaches in college. There are good wide receivers coaches in college. There are still some when it gets to kicking and punting in college. But until very recently, your special teams coach was often just the tight ends coach or someone else. So colleges have started adding more traditional special teams coaches to help with those things. The Randy Brown apparently really liked this guy. His performance in college is good enough that there is enough to unlock there. My personal preference would have been Brett Thorson, the Georgia punter, who already is good at the hang time side of things. But with punters, it's just a case of, can you get him in? Can the coaching help allow him to keep the ball in the air a little bit longer so that the return team can get down there or the coverage team can get down there and make the tackle?
And the other thing, to be fair to Gordon, is he did pick out, I think in one of your early posts, the reason why they didn't go with Thorson, which is that Georgia doesn't have their punters hold, and the Ravens like to have their punter hold, and Eckley did hold. So
apparently a very good holder as well, from what I've read.
Great. Well, there we go then. I mean, a situation where we've got a really good punter, but we've got Lamar Jackson holding snaps for kicks would be less than ideal.
this is the content you want, right, with the UKRavens podcast now. We're all
Punter court.
holder.
Oh, talk. Let's get into long snapper holder talk. We'll need something for the off season. We're entering the content vacuum now of post draft before preseason. And so round 7, I mean, this is deep in the weeds of get your guys before they become undrafted free agents, right? This is the sort of anyone we like that we don't want someone else to try and snipe with a bit more money in the undrafted free agency class. So Rayshon Benny, D-tackle from Michigan. You were quite excited about this late in the day, Gordon, when we saw it. So what do we think Benny's bringing to the team?
Good value. I think there's a high motor there, and he's a guy who was, when mock drafts were going out, was viewed as like an early day 3 type of player. So someone who was on, he's also the only defensive player they added from Michigan. And I think everyone expected they would probably add one of them. So it just brings, probably not a guy with a super high ceiling, but is a guy who I think has a real potential to win a battle to stay on this roster.
Guy who had to sit as well, right, for a long time. He's behind Mason Graham at Michigan and only got on the field in last year, but like I really liked his motor, and I think there's something with his arm length. Like he's I feel for me that he wasn't quite as consistent as I thought he would be when you sort of look at his measurables, you look at him as a whole. I don't know that he was as consistent getting to the quarterback as I thought he would be. So I think there's something there, and as a 7th round pick, it works fine for me.
And Gordon, when we chatted about it yesterday, you said the sort of closest analogy to the existing team is probably Aeneas Peebles. James, is that something you would agree with in terms of fit and style?
I think so. I think it's probably slightly different in the sense that that's the closest fit on the team, 100%. I think they're slightly different in the sense that Peebles is more explosive and is less of a you can count on him less in the running game. I think Benny has a chance to be a more complete defensive lineman, I think, and is bigger in terms of size as well. But that's the closest comparator that's on the team right now, and definitely the guy who he's going to have to beat out to win a space on the roster, I think.
And then at 253, we finish where we started at guard. So Evan Bjornston, guard from Northwestern. Is this the kind of situation where we're thinking it's just a good depth guy that can swing both sides? Is this someone that actually has got a bit of a shot at challenging someone like Andrew Voorhees for a spot, in that depth chart? What are we seeing from Evan Bjornston?
I think it was the final flourish on the this is a draft full of gritty, tough guys like that. He struggles a little bit in pass protection from the little I've seen since they drafted him. Could do better there, but a guy who's going to end people in the running game. He's really nasty, and so a really interesting pick up towards the end. Their 7th round offensive linemen haven't made it in recent years, so it'll be interesting to see if he actually makes the roster. But they may pitch him. The best chance for him probably is that they pitch him into the center battle, and that there's a battle royale with about 5 or 6 guys who are not necessarily the best prospects at center, but somebody who might get pitched into that battle just yet. Like he's got enough quickness and athleticism, I think, to be able to play the scheme and potentially even, like I said, move inside center. So maybe that's the thought process behind that pick. But an interesting guy, and as you said, probably just a guy that they wanted in free agency, and I wanted to get him on the roster.
So We'll ask the question in a minute of the sort of notable undrafted free agents, because we knew going in that the Ravens were going to have to pick up around 20 just to get to a 90-man roster. But James, you sort of trailed it earlier on, this question of what the totality of this draft means for the Ravens. What do we mean in terms of the floor, the ceiling of this team as it's rounding out, but also the style, the physicality? What does this overall class mean for the team?
Well, they haven't shied away from talking about wanting to get back to a more traditional version of play like a Raven. I think it's evolved over the last few years, and DaCosta has much more prioritized explosive athleticism in the picks he's made over recent years. It's been a bit of a departure from his predecessor, from Ozzie Newsome. They've changed the way they've looked at different positions and done things differently. And I feel that while they have still looked for tough guys, gritty guys, they have sort of started to move away from that a little bit. And this was definitely a move back towards that. It's definitely a move back towards, I mean, just plainly bigger on offense, like just getting big guys on offense. Like Vega is a big guy. Like he's athletic, but he's 320 pounds. Like he's a big dude. And so I think that's what they've done, I think, through this draft, got back to that tougher mentality. Excuse me, that older style Ravens mentality, and you saw it pick after pick after pick. They just kept picking these guys that had that grittier mentality. So I think there is maybe a signal change here in terms of what they're looking for from their players. They clearly have integrated with the coaching staff and thought about this quite clearly. It's Binter who's been the one who's been driving the kind of like, let's play like a Raven. I think it feels more connected as well. Like the coaching staff and the scouting staff feel more connected through this draft than in previous years. It feels in previous years that there's been a bit more competition maybe between the two staffs. And one of the things that the Ravens have always talked about having pride in is the way that their coaching staff and their scouting staff are connected. And it feels like that's been true in this class. So I think that's where my conclusions are from this class.
And Gordon, you mentioned earlier on about getting to the end of day 2 and having had a really positive grade for this draft. Had we ended with Vega Ioane, Zion Young, and Elijah Sarratt at the end of day 2, obviously we got him slightly later. How did that round out over the course of 7 rounds for you in terms of, a simplistic grade? But again, same question as James in terms of the floor, the ceiling, the fit.
I think it rounded out well, and I think it was a well-rounded class in terms of finding that balance between taking risks, but also getting guys who the production and the floor is a little bit higher for. I think from what I've seen in terms of how other people have viewed it, it's viewed as like a B+, A- class, which is absolutely fine. And I think it probably is as high a grade as you're going to get when you take a guy like Vega Ioane in the first round. Guard is not a sexy pick in the first round. Even chase Zion Young, edge defender in the second round. You're adding guys who are tough and physical. People are always going to view that as more of like the example I saw, or the phrase I saw people use over the weekend was like eat your veggies picks. These are not players who are going to be massive highlight reel type of players, but they're players who are going to make a huge difference to your ability to win out games, to close out games as well, especially. And I think the physicality the Ravens added throughout this draft is really important.
I kind of loved that though, because we've seen the last few years, I'm going to use a Kyle Hamiltonism here, but we've been spoiled a little bit. We had Ozzie Newsome drafting and then Eric DaCosta, and they tend to be universally loved by everyone. And how the Ravens got away with this again. They've stolen all these players. I haven't won anything, but great drafts, but has it actually got us anything? So I kind of like that maybe this class is a little bit under the radar, and maybe they are, like you say, getting back to that just gritty and just go out and win some games.
And I was going to ask you, Ian, as a non-college grinder like myself, do you feel in any way different about the team today as you did 3 days ago? Or is it more for you, well, let's see in August. Let's see when they start playing some preseason games, and then we can find our darling, and then we can suddenly fall in love with Evan Bernstein because he absolutely lands some defensive tackle on his back or something like that. Do you feel any different about the team today?
I feel like I always do, which I think is the way you go. As soon as these players are drafted, I'm in love with all of them. They're all great. They're all fantastic. Even the ones we don't particularly like, they're going to turn out to be pro bowlers and superstars. I didn't want a guard in the first round. Now it's the greatest thing that's ever happened. Like, the Ravens will be superb next year. Lamar Jackson's not going to get touched. So yeah, all in.
That's it. This is the time of the year that all 32 teams are winning the Super Bowl, and that means we're winning the Super Bowl. So, in addition to that draft class, obviously, we've mentioned free agency. It's impossible to list all the names out because even during the time that we'll have been recording, Ian Rappaport and Schefter and the likes will have tweeted 100,000 times with everyone that everyone's adding. So it is a constantly moving list. So rather than going through them one by one, let's just sort of shout out, are there any particular undrafted free agents, James, that you like or that maybe we think actually have a real genuine shot of making a contribution?
I think the only one that I would want to talk about, there's a few that are interesting, but the one to talk about a little bit is Nick Dawkins, who was Penn State center this last year, so obviously played next to Vega Ioane, who they have signed. Dawkins was sort of just off the end of the set of centers that were going to get drafted in this class, and so to pick him up is pretty good. It's pretty good business. He's not going to wow you with athleticism or with his strength, but he is really technically excellent as an offensive lineman. He's a high processor at the position, so he fits the center mold that you would want. I think he gets pitched into a battle basically between he and Pinter and Bullock and possibly Gwynn as well, who's the other guy that they signed from Atlanta that Ledford knows, into this battle for the center spot and see who comes out on top. Maybe they add a vet at some point, but I think he's a guy who, like, if I'm putting an early bet on the guy that could make the roster, I think it'd probably be him.
And it's sort of at that point, Gordon, we're looking for who's going to be that fifth best offensive lineman. It's sort of, you want your five best guys out there, sort of feel pretty happy that Stanley and Rosengarten are definitely in that top five. Vega Ioane's pretty clearly in that top five already. Some combination of John Simpson, Emory Jones, maybe at the other guard spot. And then this center competition is essentially who's your fifth guy that actually we feel is sort of protected on either side by decent guards, and therefore we could probably cover it up.
One of the things I think we talked about at the start of free agency was after the John Simpson signing, you feel good about this offensive line if John Simpson is the fourth or fifth best player on the offensive line. I think bringing in Ioane already bumps him down to fourth. So it's now just a case of, can they find a center that can potentially round that group out? I think it's going to be difficult with the guys on the roster, but they could bring in a veteran, a guy like Ethan Posich is someone who I think they could bring in. I also do wonder if they'll try Emory Jones kicking inside, like maybe he'll get involved. If not all the way through the preseason, do they spend some time over the next couple of months trying to see if he could insert himself into that battle, because he effectively becomes the odd man out at the guard spot with the Vega Ioane signing. So they still have options. I think based on what they said, they would have loved to have left this draft with Logan Jones or Jake Slaughter to add to that group. It didn't work out that way, but DaCosta did seem to hint that he felt they still had options to add guys.
There's two undrafted guys that I'd just like to mention. So Webb, Ladarius Webb's junior. How old do we all feel now seeing Ladarius Webb's son out there playing? And I'm rushing out. James is sporting the new jersey, which looks great. I'm rushing out in honor of Shane to get a Matthew McDoom cornerback jersey, who, if he makes the team or not, what a great name for Shane's list.
That is absolutely superb. And I mean, we should give some credit to the jersey. So that is the next flight. That is the new, and I have to say, having seen one yesterday on Zay Flowers, having seen one now on James, it is so much more than it looks in some of the pictures and some of the promotional videos, that iridescence and sort of the quality of stitching and all that sort of stuff. It is really, really lovely. James, how are you feeling in it and sporting it so soon after launch?
Yeah, all right. I guess everyone can also see that it looks okay on the less athletic man as well now, where the 8 turns into a 0 sometimes probably on camera. Yeah, it's great. It's the iridescence is better than I thought it would be on the printed version. So yeah, it's very nice.
I was so worried when I heard the word iridescence about the jerseys. Like I had visions of the whole numbers being this weird, shiny color. It's turned out so well. It's like a really nice. I love it on the crest at the side as well.
And all you're saying, James, is it looks just as good on offensive linemen as it does on wide receivers. It's for everybody. It is for everyone. Anyone else, either from the draft class that we want to touch on, free agency, anything else? We've seen loads and loads of new players join the team who are all going to be amazing. Anyone else that we want to touch on before we get out of here?
I just want to say, I think watching Ioane and Dwayne Ledford interacting and knowing what I know about having watched a lot of Ioane's tape, Like, this is a proper tone-setting pick. Like, it's a real change in the demeanor of this team, and some of the things that have befallen them in the playoffs. Like, I don't know that it's the same story with Ioane in the lineup. Like, I think, yeah, he's just a guard, but I think the way in which he changes the attitude of this team, maybe not in his first year, but sort of down the line, I think is, I think it's a slam dunk pick. Like, I think it was a great pick. And to me, it's just a real, for me, it was a promising sign of the future of this team, I think.
There's going to be a lot of people who are sort of jumping off ledges because the Ravens didn't get their center sorted out. Just hold fire. There's 4 months yet. There's, there is options. The Ravens aren't done. Like, they are clever guys. They'll figure this out.
Absolutely. And to your point earlier on, Ian, about falling in love with these guys, seeing the calls, seeing that interaction between the coaches and DaCosta and the players, I instantly fall in love with them. Seeing the video of Vega Ioane jumping over a barrier to go and help push a laundry cart up a hill and things like that. It's stuff like that just makes me think, yes, you couple that video with him slamming a sort of defensive liner's head into the grass on some block, and you think, I can get on board with this guy. Excellent. So let's call it a day. That is the end of the inaugural recorded video live experience of the UKRavens podcast. That means there are new ways of interacting. So we'll be on YouTube. You can subscribe, you can like, you can leave a comment, do all of the things that people smash the like button, I think is what I'm supposed to say. But really importantly, we'd love to know if this is something that you like, this is something that you want to see more of. Massive credit to AOU Studio in Nottingham. We're really grateful for all of their technical support and help on this. Obviously, doing it live here is an investment of time and money and effort, but we'd love to do more if it's something that people are interested in. But what you will start to see is our usual slightly more raggedy version in our own living rooms and kitchens, but you will start to see the video content of that because it is something that we really enjoy doing. It's something we love. It's a massive passion project for us. So we hope you come along with us and we hope you enjoy it as much as we do. But as always, if there's anything you'd like to do to be involved with the UKRavens, either on the podcast or anything to do with the community, the social medias, there's conversations about merch stores, all those kind of things, you can do that by emailing hello@ukravens.org. But until the next time, let's go Ravens.
Thank you for listening to the UKRavens podcast. This podcast is created, hosted and produced by members of the UKRavens. Join the community on social media at UKRavens and facebook.com/UKRavens. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the UKRavens podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen to your favourite podcasts. To be involved with the show, email us at ukravenshow@gmail.com. For more info, links and to stay up to date, visit www.ukravens.com.
I can't believe you've done 90 minutes and first of all it's perfect. The studio got a mention and the producer wasn't named England. Nobody knows I'm here. So that's all what was That was really good.
The video
really,
weeks away.
really good.
Nice one, man.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
I'm going to fist bump because my hands are sweaty.